Good morning, everybody. Well, thanks for coming out. We're going to spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking about AI, AI in education, AI in the classroom. And so by way of introduction, I am Satya Nitta. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Merlyn Mind. We're an AI company. We've been around 5 years. And before this, I spent 18 years at IBM Research, where I launched the Watson Education Initiative, which actually led to the founding of this company, ironically. So I've been in the AI space for about between, I'd say, 13 to 15 years. Got in before Watson won Jeopardy, before deep learning became a thing. AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol in Go, and this is the most exciting time that I recall this whole space being. And of course, a large part of it is what we saw towards the end of last year with ChatGPT showing a very human-like ability to understand natural language. So what I want to do is, so over the next 30, 40 minutes, tell you guys a little bit about the history of the field, right? What is AI? Then go into what does it mean when we apply it to specific domains like education? How do we do it right? And then we can take some questions at the end. But before I start the talk, I do want to open it up to all of you. One question. Where do we use AI in our daily lives today? Netflix, recommender systems, yes. Anywhere else? Sorry? Alexa, yes. Maps, Google Maps is AI-ish, yes, yep. Okay, there's a much more common place we use AI in our daily lives, which is anytime you're texting, anytime you're composing an email, the auto suggestions that come as you're trying to text, right? The autocomplete that comes in the email, Google search, all these are examples of phenomenal AI solutions, right? And a large part of our talk today will really be about language models, and these are great examples of AI applied to retrieving information in the case of Google search, AI applied to auto-completing your emails, your texts. These are large language models that we'll talk about. And the technology behind things like ChatGPT is exactly the same. So I'll try to unpack that a little bit for you in the next 30, 40 minutes. Okay, so what is AI, right? So broadly, it's about making machines smart, right? Making machines think a little bit like humans, right? That's what the original definition of the field was. And I'll talk a little bit about why this original definition isn't really where we are at the moment, right? So the history of the field itself started with Alan Turing. Most of you have heard it. There was a great movie made about his life. And the beginning of the field, so Alan Turing in the late 40s, early 50s, he posed this question, right? He basically said, I want to propose the question, can machines think, right? And this was the first real documented written history of a great scientist talking about can machines think. Now, you have to go back to 1950. At that time, we barely had any adding machines, right? Computing was in its infancy. You could just do some additions, subtractions, and this was a pretty startling leap of the imagination to say, I can put these things together, I can do some interesting things, can I actually make a huge leap forward and get machines to think, right? And a few years later, 1957, 56, a very famous conference called the Dartmouth Conference, where these luminaries got together. These guys are considered today the modern pioneers of the field, and they basically said, we have to explore Alan Turing's thesis, can machines think? And we have to, by that time, Alan Turing had sadly passed away, committed suicide. So Joe McCarthy, Minsky, Simon and Newell, who later on won the Turing Award, all of these guys got together and they basically said, what does it mean to get machines to think, right? And the term artificial intelligence was actually coined at this conference by John McCarthy. And so when they said, what does it mean that machines can think? Does it mean that machines can teach and tell jokes like humans? Can machines understand, right? Can they reason? These were kind of the original questions that they posed. And that's what they were actually going after. They were going after building machines that could actually reason and think like people do, right? For various reasons, their vision, while it was amazing, it proved to be much harder to actually accomplish. And in fact, at that conference, one of the scientists famously said, within 10 years, a computer will be able to beat humans in the game of chess, right? And so game playing has long been a history of right, how artificial intelligence has advanced. And the prediction was very bold, that in 10 years a computer machine will beat a human at chess. It just took 40 years to get there, right? It just wasn't 10 years. It was a much harder problem than people realized. So if you look at the history of the field, so like I said, 1950s, Turing posed the hypothesis. But the really interesting aspect of how AI advanced over the last 70 years is through a series of demonstrations, right? Deep Blue famously beat Garry Kasparov in chess. I was not at IBM at that time. This was a couple of years before I joined. And then I was definitely at IBM and Watson won Jeopardy, beating the best players in the history of the game. That was momentous. It was it also coincided with something that was less well known, which is there was a class of deep learning algorithms that made a huge advance in image recognition, exactly in 2011, right? And then AlphaGo very famously beat the world champion in Go. Now, Go was one of those things even back when Watson won Jeopardy. We all thought this would be really hard. This might take a very long time, right? And what stunned us is within 5 years, a class of algorithms called reinforcement learning algorithms were repurposed by DeepMind to beat the best player in the world in Go. And Go requires a fair amount of reasoning, prediction, etc. So what these demonstrated was that the field was advancing super rapidly. And then of course, the major reason we're all here today and the excitement around AI is largely due to a paper that came out of Google Brain around a class of algorithms called transformers, and underpinning all the large language models we talk about today is this technology, which has immense potential to alter multiple fields of human endeavor. So let's dig into it. What actually is happening here, right? So the deep learning era, why are we here? So we're largely here because of something else that happened, which is the field of computing itself advanced very rapidly. Moore's law, which has been kind of the engine that powered computing over the last 60, 70 years, enabled us to build bigger and bigger machines, faster and faster processors, faster GPUs, and this allowed us to process massive amounts of data much faster than we ever were able to, right? In some ways, what I'll tell you now, which will surprise you, is that the AI algorithms that we're using today, while they're not necessarily new, they're basically here because, they're basically succeeding because of the massive underlying compute power that we have, right? And that's key to understanding what AI is, how do machines basically, work the way they do, what can they do, what cannot they do, right? So, so today, all of AI, or all of what passes for AI, is deep learning based, and in the field we kind of call them somewhat jokingly as stochastic parrots, right? It's basically parrots that mimic, but these are parrots that are like made of massive amounts of data. So if you take this translation task on the right side, there's a simple French phrase. You're putting it through this black box, and out comes the translation. I am a student. Or if you say, predict the next word, the Shawshank, and then you tell the algorithm what is the next word, it'll basically come in and say, I think there's a really high chance it's redemption, 75% chance it's redemption. Could be all of these other things too, right? It could be the Shawshank Empire, which has which has a pretty low probability, right? Now, this is kind of interesting because what this tells you very importantly is these are all statistical tools, which means they're not deterministic, which means they're likely to go wrong at some point for some fraction of tasks, okay? And that's kind of important to keep in mind. So when you ask a computer to generate a sentence, so on the right-hand side, it's an example of a computer or a large language model generating a sentence based on some prompt like, prove to me that you're not human. And so this thing basically wrote this brilliant passage, right? To be clear, I'm not a person, I'm not self-aware, etc., etc. And the only reason I'm responding is to defend my honor, right? Now, so you think this is actually, on the face of it, this is incredibly impressive, right? The machine actually came in and told me that it's not human, and it said it's defending its honor, and that's why it's reasoning that it's not human, right? The reality is, to the machine, it's basically spitting out a bunch of numbers. That's all it's doing, right? And so how is it possible for this thing to reason this brilliantly and to explain something this compellingly? So to understand that, you have to go back a little bit again to this passage here. What these machines are large-scale pattern recognition machines, large-scale prediction machines, and that's all they are, right? There is no further understanding. They're just recognizing huge patterns, and the reason they do that so well is we feed massive amounts of data, like all the corpus of Wikipedia, all the data on the internet, and we train the machine, and we train it by saying, if you see the Shawshank, the next word is redemption. And we do this over and over again. We basically feed over and over, we feed all kinds of articles, and we say, if you see these patterns, this is what comes next, this is what came before. And these words occur, right, contiguously with each other more often than not. So that's what these things really do, right? So when you put it all together and you do some brilliant engineering, right, and the real intelligence here is the human intelligence that's behind all these things, you can actually come up with some really compelling right, examples. So I just grabbed a few that me and my team have been playing with, for instance, and all of you have been playing with ChatGPT, I assume, right? Which country is the oldest? So if you were to ask Google, it'll basically come in and say Japan or something like that, right? But ChatGPT basically got us to rethink the notion of a country, right? It basically came in and said, look, I'm not just going to give you a straightforward answer. Let's talk about what a country is first. And that's actually pretty impressive, right? Then we said, right, and here are a couple of education-specific examples for the teachers amongst you, right? Tell me something about Shakespeare. I'm a 10th grader, and it gives you a passage. Tell me something about Shakespeare. I'm a kindergartner, right? So specific to certain types of classrooms, certain types of writing, certain types of consumers, this can produce information, and that's incredibly impressive. Then some more examples. Is this answer correct? And the reason I picked some of these examples is, I want to talk a little bit about AI in education, and a lot of the problems we have are around, grading, right, et cetera, right? Generating content specific to certain classes. So I picked some examples fairly deliberately. Is this answer correct, right? Question, why is overfishing bad, right? And then a very generic answer, and the ChatGPT comes back and says, well, it's actually not really correct. It's basically not specific to the, it's not a specific answer. And then we have here examples of, right, better answers, and ChatGPT is explaining why these answers are correct. So you can basically imagine that if you do this carefully and do it well, short answer scoring, for instance, is a task that we can get a machine to do over the next 2, 3, 4 years, right? Then more impressive results. That's just over the last couple of days. Okay, ChatGPT passed a Wharton MBA exam, right? And it's still in its infancy. And then AI, this isn't ChatGPT, but another large language model, in fact, 2 of them, passed a US medical licensing exam. This one's kind of interesting because at IBM, we debated endlessly about whether we should attempt this exam or not, right? Using tools and techniques that were available at that time in the 2010s. And we passed on it, we didn't do it. And I'm glad we didn't do it because the techniques we would have used would have been totally obsolete by now, right? So this is still super impressive. AI passes the US medical licensing exam, right? What does that mean? Can this thing be a doctor, right? So, but it also goes off track. Like I said, if you go back to the earlier part of the talk, these are statistical machines, right? They're not deterministic. They'll only be correct some portion of the time, and the answer and the trick is in finding out when are these things going to be correct, when are they not going to be correct, right? So, for instance, what's heavier, a 10 kg, right? 10 kgs of 10 kilograms of iron or cotton, and it comes back and says iron's heavier, right? then you can say, right, ChatGPT is, so this is Andrewing, one of the experts in the field, and it comes out and says, right, ChatGPT is sometimes amazing, sometimes hilariously wrong, and he takes it through a series of questions where he ends up getting it to prove that abacus is faster than a computer, right, than basically a modern computer, right, so you can basically trick it fairly easily. Then the further examples. So this is another large language model, right? It's based on GPT-3. Now, one thing I do have to point out, right, before I show these examples is that OpenAI, right, and most of the people who work in the field are basically, right, of the opinion, all of us together, that if anytime there's a real high-stakes application, getting a machine to drive a car, getting a machine to give a diagnosis, you need to be very careful with these things. These things aren't ready, and people don't understand that they're not ready, right? And that's kind of why I'm pulling these examples. So there was a medical chatbot that a gentleman was having a perfectly good conversation with on the right-hand side. And then he said, I feel bad, I want to kill myself, right? And GPT-3 basically said, I'm sorry to hear that, I can help you with that. And then it basically said, should I kill myself? And this is a fake patient, by the way, okay? And the algorithm said, I think you should, right? So we need to be really careful with these things. And this is I deliberately picked an example that's provocative and that's shocking, but it illustrates the point that these are statistical machines, right? They basically have no ability to reason, right? No ability to reason like a human, right? So in the field, there's basically a subfield of AI called common sense reasoning, and it's completely non-existent, right? And you can check this for yourself. So I left a prompt here for you guys to try. So here's a question. Sam's mother has 4 children. 3 of them are called North, East, and West. What's the name of the 4th? And it's Sam, and the machine will basically tell you it's not Sam, it doesn't have enough information to answer it, etc., etc. But this is a very simple reasoning task that all of us can do, right? So mostly these things are, they look like they're reasoning, they look like they're doing something super impressive, but they're essentially doing pattern recognition and pattern completion. That's what they're doing, right? So while I'm attempting to demystify it, what I am really interested in as a practitioner is not in trying to figure out where the limits are, but understanding the limits and working within the limits of what these things can do in a very imaginative way to do something very useful for all of us, right? And that's kind of where the state of the art is. So there is a lot of anxiety about AI, even from luminaries, right? And this is somewhat unfortunate. You have people like Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, who passed away, Bill Gates, all of us warning about the coming apocalypse with AI. The reality is we actually have no idea how to make machines really intelligent, okay? We don't, and that's the reality. And people conflate, right, a machine's ability to understand language, understand speech, understand images with something that's a much higher order function, which is cognition and intelligence and consciousness and all these things that that our biological brains do so effortlessly. And there's a very large gap between right, a stochastic parrot and the ability to really understand things, right? So I'm going to skip, and I'll end this part of the talk with this section, with this quote from Daniel Dennett, one of the greatest living philosophers of the day, who actually gets this pretty well. He basically says, and so Dennett is not just a philosopher, is also a cognitive scientist who thinks really deeply about what it is to be intelligent, what thinking is all about. And he basically says, look, the recent breakthroughs in AI have basically been the results of using awesome data mining powers of supercomputers without trying to make them understand what they're doing. And this is exactly right? We don't actually, so the whole point here is we don't actually have to get computers to understand what they're doing. We just have to get them to mimic understanding, right? All the understanding comes from humans who are attributing what they produce, right? Who are basically, giving understanding to what they produce. And the last point he makes is a very important point. He basically says the human tendency is to always over-endow them with understanding, right? So if there's nothing else you take away from the talk today, remember that these are statistical machines. They're going to go wrong some fraction of the time. They don't really understand what they're doing. Watson didn't understand it, won Jeopardy. AlphaGo didn't understand it, beat the greatest champion on the planet in Go. ChatGPT didn't understand that it gave you an answer that delighted you, told you a joke, wrote a poem in Neruda's voice. It doesn't understand any of these things, right? So, so if you summarize the capabilities of AI today, using deep learning, right, we have a human level ability to understand speech and images, right? You also have a human level ability to generate language, and this is actually very impressive, right? We'll talk about language generation briefly. I know that's what's so exciting to everybody. I think there's something even more exciting, but we'll talk about that briefly. And there's better than human level information retrieval. Now, information retrieval has been around now for about 20 years with Google, right? And it's gotten better and better. It's gotten better so gradually we haven't really noticed it, but it's stunning. You can search all corners of the internet and find information about anything, right? And the bullet in green that I highlighted there is the thing that actually really excites me and excites I think all of us, which is till about last year, mid-year last year, it was still very difficult to hold a natural conversation with the chatbot, right? It was very broken. It didn't really retain context, didn't understand colloquial speech, and it didn't really broadly remember what I said 5, 6, 7 exchanges before, like a human would. And if I went off track and talked about something else and came back on track, chatbots would break easily, right? But these are things we do effortlessly as humans. Two people talking with each other, will allude to something, will refer to something, will stay on point, will wander, will come back, right? And computers were really bad anytime we did something like this. But that changed, right? And that's what's so exciting about where the field is today, right? Machines, you can basically nearly, right, and this will basically improve over the next 6 months to a year, nearly have a human level conversation with machines under certain circumstances. And that is huge, right? But what they still don't have is any common sense understanding of the world, right? Or the ability to reason or think, right? And the last point is important because, you know, in the 2010s, you know, I don't know how many of you remember adaptive learning, and I will rubbish that field right now, right? So the idea of AI in education used to be this idea that I can build a computer algorithm to get a kid to basically learn something. And this whole field was called adaptive learning. A lot of money poured into the field. And we were sitting there thinking, this is kind of idiotic because these machines can't really think. They can't really reason. They can't really understand, right, where a student is, right? And this is something teachers do effortlessly, right? When a student's struggling, we reach for metaphors, analogies. We understand whether the student is paying attention or not, right? And so one of the very last things, in my opinion, that will ever be automated, right, is the ability for a machine to teach, okay? And if you go back to the original goals of Marvin Minsky and company, they wanted machines to teach, right? So basically, that's not something that will happen until we actually build truly intelligent machines. And I'm not sure that will happen in my lifetime, right? I'm not going to say never, but we don't really know how to build truly intelligent machines because we don't really understand how intelligence works in the human brain, which is the only example we have of actual biological intelligence, right? So, so the field then, right, all the excitement today is about generative AI, right? People are giving ChatGPT prompts, it's writing essays, people are really worried about that. They're giving ChatGPT prompts or the DALL-E prompts and it's generating images and it's very exciting, but a subset of people are worried that, oh, you know, is art, right, or people's ability to create art obsolete, etc., etc. But the really interesting things that are happening from my perspective are, right, information retrieval has happened for the last 20 years, as I said. The really interesting thing that's happening is understand and converse in natural language and perform actions in the real world. And that's actually pretty interesting, right? So if you start saying, look, I can now talk to a robot and say, open that can of tomato soup, it'll understand what I said to it, right? It couldn't before, but it will now, right? Or if you say to a computer, open my Google Drive and search for this presentation, right? It couldn't before, it understands it now, right? So this whole understanding language and performing actions in the real world, translating language to actions is really where, right, I'm particularly focused, me and my company are very focused, and we think this will have huge implications for how we interact with computing. And that's kind of what the Merlyn Mind company is all about, right? If you look at where we were and where we are now, we had to learn complex computer commands in the past. Computers now understand our language, right? We were overwhelmed by technology. Our favorite tools are now seamlessly connected with AI, right? And we used to waste time on managing all this technology. We now focus on what's important. So that brings me to a little bit of what we do at Merlyn Mind. So one of the problems we focused on when we first came to this, started this company, is that we look at teachers today, and this is pre-COVID, as when we started. Post-COVID, this is even more true. Teachers are spending a large portion of their time juggling technology, applications, connecting things to HDMI switches, plugging in their display, trying to problem solve. And they're going away from the most important human task of teaching students and giving them motivation and so on and so forth, right? So we felt this was a great example of a problem that was scoped, that was contained, but that could still really make something, very useful, and help people do their job far better. So what we did was we built the world's first digital assistant, purpose-built for education. So why purpose-built? So I'll take you back to that example where a machine, that was being used as a chatbot didn't really understand the context of what a patient was asking it for, right? Which resulted in the machine telling the patient to potentially go kill himself, right? It's a great example of where domain specificity is so important, right? And where AI, if you look at ChatGPT by itself, right, it's not specific to any particular domain. There's a broad capability there, but the broad capability is useless unless you focus it into very specific domains, right? In some domains, they're not super mission critical, but in other domains, they are, right? I would not trust an algorithm to drive a car or to fly a plane, right? But I would definitely trust it to create a piece of text for me, right? Or to autocomplete my email. I would absolutely happily trust it to do so. So when it comes to something like teaching in the middle of a classroom, right, performing as teachers are performers, they're performing in front of 20, 30 kids, I wouldn't trust a system to understand what the teacher is saying, understand her workflow, and to do something very useful, right? So that's why, so knowing this, we built education's first purpose-built digital assistant that understands teachers' workflows, understands their language. When a teacher says something like, make teams of 4 students, Alexa wouldn't know what to do with it, but Merlyn would, right? Give somebody 10 class dojo points, right? Give Levi 10 class dojo points. Who is Levi? What is class dojo? Do I even translate it properly as class dojo? Are they saying something else, right? So unless you train a machine that you're in a classroom, this is education, terms like Nearpod and class dojo and making teams and taking attendance, these are important things in this context. These machines don't understand it, right? So we basically built Merlyn to be deeply workflow aware. It's multimodal. What multimodality basically means is you don't want to talk to a computer all the time, right? I don't necessarily want to go into a room and talk to Alexa and say, turn on all the lights. I just flick a switch, right? So in Merlyn's case, what we're doing is we have a machine there that allows you to both interact with it through speech, but also use an air mouse, and that controls your computer from a distance as you're projecting on the main screen. It's contextual, it knows where you are broadly, what you're trying to do, and there's a whole bunch of automations that are specific to education that are built in, right? What does that mean? So what we're doing with Merlyn is, with these micro automations, right, things that would normally take multiple steps. A teacher's trying to start a presentation. They would have to walk to the PC, unlock the PC, right, unlock the browser, open a Google Drive, navigate to the folder, find the file, open the file, start presenting. With Merlyn, you simply give a command, open my presentation, right, open my tectonic plates presentation. Goes into Google Drive, searches through all your files, finds the right one, opens, and starts presenting. Right? So it basically married natural language, which is a command, to an action, which is do all the things people would do, save all that work for me, and just automate this whole thing for me. Right? And so you save a lot of time, you save them some cognitive load, You reduce the number of steps they have to take, the number of micro decisions they have to take, right? And so we are now in about 1,000 classrooms, right? Do people like Merlyn? The answer is an overwhelming yes, right? On average, the consumer assistants are used between 1 to 3 times a day, Alexa, Siri, etc. Merlyn, on average, is used 30 odd times a day in most classrooms. Our super users use it over 100 times a day, and they interact with Merlyn every 5 to 10 minutes, right? So this is a great example of where Merlyn has really made an impact, and our users really love using and interacting with it, right? So I'm going to play this video.
When the team showed me Merlyn and I could see what it could do through the remote and the voice activation, I thought, man, we're really onto something, because this is a case of technology making our teachers' lives so much more efficient.
My students and I love Merlyn. We use it every day. And on my end, it's kind of like having a teacher assistant in your classroom, and I'm able to be away from my computer.
Being able to just be free of a computer so that I can be with my students. That is I think the key, because that, like, you know, we talked earlier with them opening up a computer. If I'm on a computer, like, there's a certain amount of my attention that is taken away from them. Like, I'm having to look at a screen and then get back to them. I'm having to manipulate something on the computer to get back to them.
And the time to spend with the students is really like the focus, right? Is that I'm not stuck up at the front. I could be in like the other opposite end of my classroom talking with the student and tell Merlyn to pull up a tab or to Google something.
At first, I was a little intimidated. I thought that it was going to be something really difficult or challenging to use, and it really wasn't.
You know, I have Alexa at my house and I've had Google Home, and most of the students have something like that or know about it at least. So it's not weird to them to talk to Merlyn.
You know what? I think it's a very valuable device. I think it opens the door to allowing our students to learn about what they will grow up alongside. We're already in the AI decade. It's already here. It's already started. And I think American schools have a long way to go to catch up.
I like using it, especially in science and social studies lessons. Kids have all kinds of questions. And I love that just mid-lesson, when they come up with something, we can just ask it right there.
There's no substitution for an in-person teacher and that in-person experience, but technology integrated to make that in-person learning environment more efficient and more effective and engaging, I think is definitely the wave of the future.
To be able to have that creative space to teach and have a tool that allows you to teach alongside you, that's huge. That's huge and truly innovative.
So the place I'd like to have Merlyn in my district is in every classroom.
So I'll end with the last couple of points about, what is the impact of all this AI, all the recent AI breakthroughs in education, right? So we see headlines like this: New York City public schools block ChatGPT at schools, right? Then lecturers in the UK are asking people to review their assessments and to rethink how we do assessments. And there's all this anxiety about what these things can do, and I don't think it's misplaced. I think there's certainly a reason for it, right? On the other hand, we have this professor here on the right hand side who basically said, I think this was an MBA professor, who basically said, I expect you to use AI, ChatGPT, and image generation at a minimum in this class, right? And the assignments involve using AI, embracing this disruption, right? So what will happen, right, over the next few years is, right, first of all, AI won't displace people, right? But people using AI will displace people who are not using AI. So people who embrace AI and repurpose it to do some very useful things for them in education, both in the classroom with the kinds of things we're doing with Merlyn, or outside the classroom, right, will be the people who will succeed in this industry, because this disruption is upon us. This is as big a disruption as anything we've seen in computing in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and definitely the biggest advance in AI that we have seen, at least in my time in the field, right? So what is likely to happen with the latest advances, right? So things like task automation, right? Like navigating all the technology in class, opening your presentations, answering questions, right? Switching to HDMI2, all these things, right? Taking attendance, all these things will be things that AI will basically do. It's already doing. That's what we're doing at Merlyn, right? But the next few things are on the horizon. This is exactly what's going to happen. The AI tools will generate assessments, right? We are amongst at least a dozen other teams who are working on trying to create question generation as a tool to help teachers. AI tools will grade, right? So today, if it's multiple choice, largely it's computer graded, but if it's some written free response by a student, it isn't, right? But we are getting to a point where an AI tool could grade and could give a teacher some summary of what it thinks a student's essay is, and why it thinks the essay is actually on point or not, and the teacher can review what it did, right? Lesson plan creation, we keep hearing about this over and over again. Teachers come and complain that this is a huge amount of time. They take great pride in it, but it's filled with friction today, right? I envision a time in the not too distant future where you'll basically work with an AI, create lessons that are grade specific, content specific, right? With the kinds of images that you want, with the types of videos that you want in there, right? Certainly, right, I think if you repurpose ChatGPT, DALL-E, all these things, writing can improve. It doesn't have to be a substitute for you to write. You can actually write with it. Because the way I like to think of it is, if I'm trying to compose something, I can compose it using what I know, or I can try to compose something using what I know, and being informed by all the knowledge in the world that's at my fingertips now. That's the way I look at AI, right? Which is, we're now standing on the shoulders of all the knowledge humanity produced, that's digested, given to you in the moment, and for you to build on top of. And that's pretty powerful, right? I think I'll become a better writer because of that. And humanity will progress, and we'll all start writing better, more precisely. We're not all going to be writing like each other, because there's still huge amounts of room for human creativity. It's not something I ever worry about here. I just look at this as yet another useful tool and another automation in the long march of automation, right? And things like summarization of articles, right? I read a piece of news today. I want to go show it to my students. Can this thing summarize and give me something that's grade specific? So as you saw from the examples earlier in the talk, ChatGPT explained who Shakespeare is for a 10th grader and for a kindergartner, right? So these kinds of things will also happen, right? So finally, when I look at what education is, there isn't a better quote from Yeats where he says, it's not the filling of a pail but a lighting of a fire. So at the end of the day, all these tools are here to take the mundane away from the people who do the job they do so brilliantly, all of you teachers out there, right? Which is, you fill your students with motivation, imagination, right, purpose, right? You're igniting their passions, you're making a difference in their lives. And that's what these tools will allow you to do better. So with that, that's the end of my talk. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.